Hello everyone and welcome to GeoTab Online Training. Thanks for joining us today for Tuesday's talk. This is Carrie Carter and today we have Angie with us. Angie is our reports guru and Angie is going to get into some advanced reports today and she's got some great stuff for us. Angie, I am going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Hi everybody. As Carrie mentioned, we're going to go over some advanced reporting. Now this is part 2 of a 3-part series, so I highly recommend if you're watching this today that you've already watched part 1. I'll cover over a couple of the things that we went over in part 1 just at a very high level, just to give you an overview of what we did. But you will want to know some of this information as you'll see as I go through some examples. So if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and watch part 1. You can still obviously be here today, but it'll just help you give a little bit more background to what we're covering today. So in saying that, I'm actually just going to hop back to presentation from part 1, and I'm just going to very, very quickly just go over what we went over last time. So we covered over some key formulas. So these are the formulas that I use on a daily basis and a lot of the other people playing around with GeoTab reports use as well. So we covered over string manipulation. So basically what that means is pulling apart text. So we tend to use these when we're looking at groups in reports. So we all know with an Excel report, if a vehicle is part of multiple groups, it's all separated by commas. We can use these formulas to separate those groups out to do better filtering and sorting on those values. Then we covered over some mathematical formulas. So we looked at count, sum, max, min, average. So those are very common formulas. Those would almost be considered a little basic, but I wanted to include them in the advanced reporting because they can be used in combination with some more advanced formulas. And those advanced formulas would be the conditional formulas. So those are the typical if, then, else. So if this happens, then I want it to show this. Else, if it doesn't happen, then I want it to show this. And that's kind of the idea around that one. And in combination with that, we also have some other conditional formulas, and, or, and not. So and means, you know, if all of these things happen, then I want it to show this. An or would be if any of these statements are true, then I want it to show this. And a not is simply just the opposite. So if this is true, I want to actually show the false. Then we have conditional mathematical formulas, so count if, sum if, and then doing sum if s or count if s, which is just using multiple criteria. So those are actually really powerful formulas that you can use to count maybe the number of exceptions for a vehicle or for the entire time period that you have it. Maybe you've broken it down by multiple days or some sort. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those. And then the final thing is lookup functions that we covered. I think the most popular one is VLOOKUP, but we did discover there are some limitations with that. Looked at some examples of what VLOOKUP looks like, and then talked about index and matching, which is what we like to call VLOOKUP on steroids. It's a lot more powerful than a VLOOKUP would ever be, and it gets rid of all those limitations. This is going to be available for download once we've finished the 3-part series for you to use as a reference tool. So you can see everything that I just talked about. We have a description of what it means and the syntax, so how you would actually use it. And that brings us to part 2. So for part 2, we're actually going to cover troubleshooting, so how to handle errors in Excel. And then we're going to look at working with dates and times and how that all kind of works, because it's a little bit of a funny one in Excel. And then we're going to finish it off with formatting and conditional formatting. So what I've done is I've done the same thing that I did before. I've got a description, I show you the syntax. I've also included an example as well. So this is how it would actually look in Excel if you were to actually run it. And we'll go through some of these in an example file, Excel file as well, but I'm just going to go through these first before we hit to that example. IsError is kind of a catch-all. What this is going to do is it's going to actually return a true or a false, and it's looking to see if the cell that you're referencing or the text or value that you're referencing is an error or not. You can see here in cell A1 I have a reference error, and because IsError covers pretty much every error that you could get in Excel, it doesn't matter what that error is. It could be ref, it could be NA value, divide by zero error, number, name, null. You can see it could have been any one of those. I just chose reference as an example. And all I have to do is just say equals is error, and then in my brackets I choose the cell that I want to know about. So I chose A1, and because A1 has a reference error in it, what's going to show up in B1 is just going to be the word true, because there is an error in there. Now let's say, for instance, A1 had the number 10. What would happen is in cell B1, there is no error in A1, so it would actually show false. So it's just a good way to check to see if there are errors or not. And you can imagine that you could use this in combination with some of those if formulas that we went through in part 1. So you could check if is error. Then I want to be able to maybe show something other than true or false. Maybe I wanted to say there is an error or unknown or something along those lines. Then we can go into some more defined troubleshooting formulas here. So this one is specifically looking for is NA. So I tend to use the catch-all because it just makes more sense to me, but if you want to, you can absolutely use is NA. So this obviously will only look for the NA values, and it's the same kind of thing as what the is error did before. So it's going to check the value, and it's going to return true or false depending on the outcome. You can see here that cell A1 has an NA error in it. I've put in equals is NA, and I've referenced cell A1, and it's resulting in true because there is an NA error in A1. Pretty much exactly the same as what is error was, but it's specific just to the NA error. The next one is checking if a cell is blank. This can come in handy if you're maybe doing a formula in one of the GeoTab reports. You're on the report tab, and you want to check. I tend to use this sometimes if we're referencing something on the data tab and it's blank. If I just say equals whatever the cell is in the data tab, what will happen is it will just result in a 0 if it's blank, but maybe I actually want it to actually just show blank on the report tab. So I could use this is blank formula. It's pretty straightforward, same as the other ones. You can see that cell A1 is blank. There's nothing in there. So I would just do equals is blank, reference cell A1, and it's going to give me that true or false. With that example with the report tab, what I would probably do is do an if statement around the is blank. So I could do if and then put in is blank A1, and then I want to actually tell the system what I want it to display if it actually is blank instead of showing me true or false. For this instance, I would put if is blank A1, and then for the true I would put blank because I don't want it to actually show me anything. I could also say the word blank as well. Any one of these can be used in combination with an if statement, and that's typically when we would use these. If error is another kind of catch-all. So it's the same kind of thing as is error, but it's in combination with an if. So you know how I said that you could take that is error and throw an if statement around it? This does that job for you. It's actually built into the if statement. So you can see that it's saying it returns a value you specify. So it's not going to give me a true or false. It's going to return whatever I tell it to if a formula evaluates to an error. You can see in my example here, I've got from A1 to A4, I've just got vehicle names. And then in cell C1, I have vehicle 5. And vehicle 5 actually isn't in that list of vehicles in column A. So what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a simple, all I'm really telling it to do is saying, if vehicle 5 is not in the list in column A, then results with the word error. That's essentially what that formula is doing. So let's just kind of walk through it here. Because my if statement is built into this, so I'm saying equals if error, and then anything contained in that bracket before the comma is what I'm looking at. So I want to know if that results in an error. So I've just done a simple match formula. So I'm just saying match, and I want to match C1 in cells A1 to A4. And the 0 meaning an exact match, if you recall from the index match that we went through before. So basically, I want to know if there's a match, but if there isn't a match, then I want it to display error. Okay, so let's hop on over to dates. Now this is kind of a fun one and can be a little bit tricky, but believe I've come with a pretty good, straightforward way to describe it. So if anybody's worked with dates in Excel, they know that it can be a little bit funny when you're trying to maybe figure out days in between dates or figuring out time in between two different times, and it really helps to understand how dates are structured in Excel, because it's not as straightforward as what it looks like on the front. So the date that you would actually see in Excel is actually a serialized number. We'll go over what the number actually represents, and then we're going to decompose the date. So we're going to separate out date and time, which is very useful with MyGeotab reporting. Then we're going to go over some date arithmetic, so just basically how you can do what I just mentioned, figuring out days in between dates and so forth. And then we're going to use dates within a conditional if formula. All right, so what do the number represent? So basically, Excel stores dates and times as a number representing the number of days since the very first day in Excel. So the very first day in Excel is January 0, 1900. So if you're trying to do statistics on anything in the 1800s, not really going to work. But it also has a fractional portion of a 24-hour day. And you can see where it says all the DDD. So DDDD, that is the days since January 0, 1900, and all the T's is the fractional portion of a 24-hour day. So that's the time of day currently. And I'll go over that if that doesn't make sense. So the date, January 1st, 1900, has a numerical value of 1 because it's 1 day since the very first day in Excel. Obviously, January 2nd, 1900 has the value of 2, and so forth and so forth. Now, if we look at the times, Excel sees the times as decimal fractions, 1 being the time 24 hours, or 0000. For instance, 1800, which is 6 p.m., has a value of 0.75 because it is 3/4 of 24 hours, or 3/4 of the whole number 1. Now, I know this may get a little bit confusing, but I just wanted to give you an example here. So, for example, if I'm looking at January 5th, 2016 at 9 a.m., if I were to convert that to a number in Excel, this is the number that it would actually result in. So in the blue, you can see that is the amount of days it's been since the very first day in Excel, January 0, 1900. And the decimal portion here, 0.375, it's 9 a.m., so 0.375 is what 9 a.m. is in the fraction of 24 hours. So knowing what we know now, that the date is actually stored as a number and that the beginning portion is the date and the decimal portion is the time, we can actually split these two apart. I tend to do this when I want to report on, in a pivot table, if I want to just show summarized by date. I can't really typically do that with the time attached to it because Excel is treating all of those rows as individual dates instead of just, let's say, March 1st. So to do that, we have two formulas. The INT, which is integer, that formula is what's going to actually extract just the date portion of the serial date and time. It's just as simple as doing equals int and then choosing the cell that has the date time in it. So as you know, in MyGeotab reports, anytime we put a timestamp or date and timestamp in a file, it's got the date and the time. So it is exactly what we've been talking about. So I would just do equals int, choose the cell that has the date time in it, and then what it would result in, and I'll show you in a second, it would result in just the date portion of the number. So if we go back to this example here, if I were to apply the int formula to this date, the number would actually just show 42374.000000, so there would be no time attached to it. Whereas the mod formula, that's actually where I'm going to get just the time, so it's going to disregard the date. So it'll return the remainder after the number is divided by divisor. So by dividing it by 1, it will return only the decimal portion of the serial date and time. If we go back to this example, if I were to say equals mod, and then I choose the cell that has the date in here, and then the addition to this one is I've got a comma and my divisor. So my divisor would be 1. So what would result with this is the number value would actually be 0.375. So you can see the difference there. And I do have an example here just to show you. So we'll assume that the below date is in cell A2, which is January 5th, 2016, 9 a.m., in which we already know what those number values are. So in cell B2, we have the formula equals int A2. So A2 is the date, but we've converted it to that number so you can see that serial number. And the result in cell B2 actually shows me exactly what I just said. It's giving me just the date portion of that serial number. So the time of 0.375 is no longer there. It's all zeroed out. So I convert that back to my date time look and feel. It's going to give me January 5th, 2016, but it's actually midnight because there's no time associated to it. Now similarly in column C, now I want just the time. So I'm doing my mod formula. So I'm equals mod, and I'm grabbing cell A2, which you can see has the date right there. And I'm dividing by 1 because I just want just the time portion of it. So you can see the result in cell C2 is 0.375. So the date no longer exists, and if I convert it to the date time format that we know, it's bringing me back to January 0, 1900, which is the very first day in Excel because it's 0, and it's giving me just the time. So then we could format these to show me just time and no date, and for the column B, give me just the date and no time. All right, so we talked about arithmetic with the dates. So one popular formula that can be used is called date diff. So the date diff function computes the difference between two dates in a variety of different intervals. So maybe you want to know how many days it's been between dates, or you can actually look at months, years, and you can also look at years and months and so forth. It's fairly straightforward. You would just do equals date diff, and you want to put in your start date and your end date, and the unit is what you actually want it to return. Do I want to look at how many days, months, years, and so forth? Now the caveat with this is the start date must be less than the end date. So you can imagine if you're playing with dates in Excel, there could be times where the start date is actually greater than the end date. So this is when you would actually throw in those if statements, and I'll go over that in a second. But just simply looking at the date diff formula, let's look at our example. So the start date is 6/1/2001, and the end date is 8/15/2002. So obviously the end date is greater than the start date. So in our formula, we would just put in equals date diff, and we would grab the value of 6/1/2001, and the end date we would grab 8/15/2002. And then we've decided we want to actually look at how many days are in between those two dates. So we just simply put in brackets, or in quotes, the letter D. Just as simple as that. So what will result in that cell is the number 440. So 440 is the amount of days between June 1st, 2001 and August 15th, 2002. Similarly, I could do a Y to give me the amount of years, which would be 1, essentially. Well, actually, it's complete years, so yeah. Now let's look at that same kind of example, and let's look at conditional formulas, tying that all together. What we can do in this example is we have some shift times. This is just an exceptions detailed report that I've added a shift start and a shift end time. So this is good for an example where a fleet may want to know, are my guys breaking rules outside of their work hours or during their work hours? Obviously, we have our after hours in our trips report, but it's also useful to have this in other types of reports as well. So my shift start is 8 a.m. and my shift end is 4 p.m. So all I've done in column E is I've got a formula that's basically just saying if, and this is where I start to use that and that we talked about in part 1. So if both of these conditions result in true, then what I wanted to show. And there's other ways that you can do this, but this was just a quick example to get you an idea of how the dates would actually the times would actually work. In this example, in column D, I've got my start time. I've already applied my mod formula to it, so it's giving me just the time. So I no longer have the date attached to it. So in column E, I'm basically saying if D6, so that very first start time of 8:52:15 a.m., if it's greater than cell B1, and you can see I've got some dollar signs around cell B1, and that means that as I fill the formula down, that B1 is not going to increment with the rows. It's just going to stay at B1 and only B1 because that's the cell that I want to reference, and that's the only cell I want to reference with that. But I also want to know if it's less than B2. So if both of those are true, then I want it to say false. If they aren't, then I want it to say true. So you can see my results here. I have some times here that are outside of those hours. So the bottom two, 7:36:26 a.m. is definitely outside of 8 to 4, and 9:16:34 p.m. is outside of 8 to 4, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So you can see my results would be true for those two. So we could use these now to do some calculations within the report. So we're going to actually go into formatting and conditional formatting, and we're going to use that example that we just talked about. But I'm just going to quickly cover formatting and what that means. So it's just a way for us to help, visualize the data in different ways. So you can call out certain things by coloring them a certain way, or you could even format a date to look or time to look a certain way that you want it to look to make it easier to consume. So there are preset formatting supplied by Excel. There's actually quite a few, and they're broken down into their categories. So you can see there are some preset date and times, numbers, currencies, and everything. But I think the spot that I spend the most time in is custom. Definitely play around with it. There's lots of things that you can do in there. I'm sure I don't know all of them, but there's some pretty neat things that you can do with the custom. So here's an example of one when we talk about time. Let's say you're in a trip summary report, and you've got your durations as hours, minutes, seconds. So you can see we've got hours, minutes, seconds right there, and it would show me in the green, the first green example, 4:46:11. Now, you could also do hours, minutes, and it would just be 4:46, but sometimes that can confuse people. They're not sure, is that hours, minutes that I'm looking at, or is it minutes and seconds that I'm looking at? So there are ways that you can make it a little bit easier to understand. So you could do a custom format, and you can see I've got my custom format here, which has my hours, and then the quotes around the H. So meaning that I want to know the hour number, so the number 4, and I want it to follow with the letter H if it's the hour. For the minutes, I want it to follow with the letter M if it's a minute, and similarly for the seconds, I want it to follow with S if it's a second. So you can see now looking at that second green example, it clearly says 4 hours, 46 minutes, 11 seconds. So there's no guesswork there. You know exactly what that time looks like. So we can also apply conditional formatting. So this is a really fun way to throw some color at things. In this example, and I'm actually going to go into the file in just a second, I just want to show you what the screens look like. So you can simply go in your standard home ribbon in Excel. First, you want to highlight the cells that you want to apply the conditional formatting to. It could be an entire column. It could be just a subset of cells. Highlight whatever it is that you want to apply this to, and then just click on the conditional formatting button. And you've got a few options here. This example is just looking at a basic highlighting cells, and you can choose what conditions you want to highlight based off of. Do I want to highlight if the value is greater than a certain number or less than a certain number? Or maybe I want to highlight if it's between two different values, or if it's exactly equal to a certain text or number that I'm looking at. Or if I'm not really caring about it being exact, if I just want to know if that cell contains a certain text, then I can highlight that way as well. Or I can actually look at dates, so a date occurring on a certain date. The other one that I tend to use in different situations is duplicate values. It's simple. You just highlight the range that you want to know about, and then you just click on duplicate values, and then Excel knows what to do. So basically, if there's duplicates in that range, it will highlight them for you. Now what would pop up is this second window at the bottom left here. So I chose the equal to for my after hours, and I want to know if it's equal to true, and I want to actually do a custom format. There are some built-in formats from Excel where you could have a light red fill with a dark red text, a yellow fill with a dark yellow text, or a green fill with a dark green text, or you could have just light red fill, just red text, or maybe a red border. Those are the built-in ones, but you can customize how you want it to look. So there's obviously lots of options that you have there. In this example, I did choose custom format, and I chose that I wanted the text to be bold, and I wanted it to be a dark red. Once I do that, I just click OK, and then what it results in is what you see here. So only the values that say true are the ones that have that formatting that I've applied to that rule. So I'm just going to pop out here and head into that Excel file, and let's actually go through some of these things that I just talked about. So here's my file. I've got my 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and I've got my date and my time, but you can see that my date still has the time associated to it. So if I actually just convert this to a number, you'll see what I've been talking about in the cell. So I can actually, I can format either by right-clicking on the cell and formatting my cells, or I can go up to my formatting up here, and I can choose number, and there's the number, the serial number of that date. March 15th, let's just do undo just to show you. March 15th, 2016 at 12:47:04 p.m., so I even have seconds in there, converts to 42,444 days since the very first day in Excel, and it's 0.53, which is that fraction of the 24 hours. So now let's say I want to actually get just the date from this number. You can see that the formula is pointing to cell Q11 on the Data tab. And if I show you, that's going to look exactly the same. And let me just make this bigger because that's pretty tiny. So you can see on the Data tab, it's got everything all together, and I can convert this to number again. It's going to give me the same value. So, but I don't want the number associated to it. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to switch it back to the datetime format, and I can easily do that. I could just change the format by going, going over here or going into more number formats, or I could just format paint if I know that there's another cell out there that has the look that I want it to have. I can just click on that cell, and I can click on Format Painter up on the top left here. So I'm going to grab the format from that cell, and then I'm going to apply it. Just click on that cell. I'm going to apply it to that cell. So just a really quick, easy way to format your cells if there's already something out there that's already done that way. All right, so let me just make this bigger so we can all see the formulas. All right, so right now it's just straight up referencing the Data tab, but I want just the date. So if you recall, the formula is int. So I'm going to do equals int, and I'm putting it in between the data and the equals. I'm going to do my open bracket or parentheses, and then I'm going to close it off there. So I want just the integer of whatever is in cell Q11. Just hit enter, and you can see that it results in the date and the time being midnight. And if I just fill that down on a few of these, you'll see that the date will stay, but all the times will be midnight. Because if I convert to number, there is no decimal there. It's just all zeros. Now if I just do my format pane, throw that back up there, I can now just double click on the, you can see on the bottom right of the cell, this is another little trick here, there's a little square at the bottom right, and as you cover over it, you get a little plus sign there. If I double click on that, it will autofill that formula all the way down to the bottom of the data. And now, because all of those cells are highlighted, I can change the format. So I can simply go into my little shortcut here, so maybe I just want it to be the short date, and I can click on there, and now it's just showing me the date. And we know this really is just the date by the exercise that we just went through. Now let's look at the time. So the time actually is including the date still, and I'll show you by going into my More Number Formats. And you can see I've got my custom window here. There's lots of funky things going on here, but don't worry. I can choose, let's see, month, day, year, hours, minutes, seconds, AM, PM. So that'll give me what it looked like over. So you can see, even though visually it looks like it's just the time, it does still actually have the date associated to that. And I can convert that to number again, and you can see that for yourself. All right, so because we only want to look at the time, I'm going to apply my mod formula now. So you can see I've got equals data Q11 again. So it's looking at the exact same cell that column D was looking at. Now I'm going to actually put in mod, M-O-D, open parentheses, and you can see it's a little bit different. So it's telling me that I need a divisor. So I'm just going to put a comma, put in the number 1 as my divisor, close that off, hit enter. Now you can see it's kept the date or the time, but the date is back at that very first day in Excel. And if I fill that down, you can see that it applies, it's the same for all of them. So now what I want to do is put it back to the format of just the date, but now I know that it really is truly just the date. I'm just going to format paint, nice and easy, and then make sure that this still has your formula in there, and then I'm going to double click here and fill it down. So now if I convert this to number, you can see it's just 0.53. Okay, so there we go. All right, so now let's use our after hours. After hours. So I just inserted a new column, and this is where I'm going to throw in my true and false to see if it's after hours or not. All right, let me make this just a little bit bigger again. Let me just hide a column so we can see everything all at once. Here we go. Okay, so I just double-clicked on the cell. I'm going to do equals if. And Excel is great because it helps you along the way. If you forget how the syntax is supposed to work, it tells you exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So I want to apply my AND function because I want to know if two things are true, if both of them are true. So if, and I'm just going to say and anything inside my and is what I'm looking at. So I want to know if the start date is greater than cell B1, and remember we want those dollar signs around cell B1. You can type them in, but you can also hit F4. F4 will do the same thing. So I'm just going to hit F4 on my keyboard here, and you can see it put the dollar signs around it. Now you can see there's a dollar sign before the letter B, but there's also a dollar sign before the number 1. So it's going to hold on to both column B and row 1. If I hit F4 again, it switched it, so now it's only going to stick at row 1. If I do it one more time, now it's only going to stick at column B. One last time, and there's no absolute references. So now if I just do it again, I want both of them. So if E5 is greater than B1, and if E5 is less than B2, and I'll just hit F4 again, false, true. So if it's greater than the start time and it's less than the end time, then it is actually within the work hours, so it should be showing false. If it's outside of those, then we want it to say true. So let's see if we do have any that are true, and we do. So we have 4:13 p.m. is true, so that is after hours. 5:41, these are all after hours as well, so we're getting a true. Now, visually looking at it, you can see the trues, but if you're trying to scan through and scroll, it may become a little bit more difficult to actually see the true. And this is where that conditional formatting comes into play, what I was talking about. So if I want to highlight just the true values, I can actually just highlight just that section. But because I'm looking for specifically the word true, it's okay that I highlight the entire column. If you were looking for blanks, it may not make so much sense because it's going to highlight everything from F1 to F3, and then everything after the data it's going to highlight as well because they're blank. But for this one, it's okay because I'm looking for a specific word. So I'm just highlighting column F, and I'm going to go up here to my conditional formatting. And I'll go to highlight cell rules, and you can see this is the same thing that I showed you in the slide deck there. And I want to know if something is equaling exactly to a word that I'm looking at. So I want to know if it's equal to the word true. So I'm just going to click on equal to, and I have my little window that pops up here. And I can go back and I can actually click on something. You know, if I want it to be equal to a certain cell, I could do that. But in this case, I don't. So I just want the word true. And you can see as I type it, it's because I've chosen equal to and not something that contains this, it only highlights once I finish typing the word because it hasn't found an exact match yet. So you can see already that it's working, and it's highlighted with the preset options that I have here, which I can choose from if I want to. But I can actually custom format. So this is what I was talking about before. I'm going to bold it, and I'm going to choose my dark red color. And I can do other things. I can put a border around it. I can put a fill in behind. And I can even, if I was looking at numbers or anything like that, I can do my custom custom numbers, dates, times, whichever. But for this example, it's just as simple as text. I just want it to be red. So I'm just going to click on OK. And you can see it's already done it. I click on OK. And now you can see I've got falses in here, which is fine. But now it's easier for me to pick out those ones that are after hours because it's showing true. And there we go. A lot easier to read if I'm going through pretty fast. I can see which ones are the exception to the rule. Now let's look at some other ways that we can do conditional formatting. Below, we've got stop duration in the trip details report. So if it's below 1 minute, then I want it to actually show it to be only as seconds. Remember how we looked at that example a few back here where we see that we've got 4H, 46M, and 11S? I want to actually say if the value of the cell is less than a minute, then I only want it to show if it's just seconds. I don't want it to say 0H, 0M, and maybe 46 seconds. I don't really want it to show that. I only want it to show just 46 seconds. And then I can also do, if it's greater than 1 minute, but also less than 1 hour, then I only want to look at the M and the S. So maybe 10 minutes and 15 seconds. I don't want it to say 0H, 10M, 15S. And then I can also do, if it's greater than or equal to an hour, then I want to format it as the, let's say, 4H, 46M, however many seconds. So we can do this all with conditional formatting, which is pretty cool. So because the dates are stored as numbers, we know that 1 minute is equal to 0.04166, and 1 hour is 0.0006944. And you can see in the example here what it actually looks like. And I'm actually just going to go into our demo database here and download a trips history report. So let me go into the basic one. This database actually has the report one hidden from view, the default one. So I'll go into our ABC company, which is another demo one that we like to play around with here. And I'm just going to run a trips report. There we go, and I'm going to choose my report. All right, so you can see driving duration right here and stop duration. So this is what I meant when we're talking about that conditional formatting. So we've got some that were less than an hour, so we're just showing 10M for 10 minutes. But you can see this first one is greater than an hour, so we actually show 3H 42M. So let me just show you what that kind of looks like here. So to take a look at existing conditional formatting in Excel, you can actually just go up to your conditional formatting, make sure you're on the cell that you want to know about, and just click on Manage Rules. So off the bat, it's just going to show you the rules that currently apply to that cell, and you can see it says Current Selection. You can look at the conditional formatting rules that apply to the entire worksheet, or just a specific sheet if you wanted. So because I just chose that cell, I want to look at them. Now, because we do allow for different languages in our reports, you can see some funny characters here. So that's Japanese. We're not going to look at the Japanese ones there. We're actually going to look at our standard ones. So this is what I was mentioning here, the cell value. So I'm applying it to the entire section. And we are in column I. So you can see it's actually applying it to columns G through I, and it's highlighting just the data. So this first condition, and you have to do several different ones because there are different criteria. So this one is looking at if it's greater than or equal to an hour. So if it is, then I just want to show hours and minutes. The one up here is saying if it's less than an hour, then I want to show just minutes. So we could actually add seconds to this, which actually isn't there. We've chosen to just hide the seconds for this one, but it is actually there. So let's say if we want to look at if the cell value is less than, it's showing us just the minutes, we can edit the current rule. So I'm just going to edit the rule, and I'm going to edit the format. So you can see it gives you a preview of what it's going to look like. I'm just going to edit the format, and I'm actually going to go over to the number tab. And you can see it gives us what it currently is set at. But I also want to add seconds to it. And you can see we actually have seconds in the line below. So I can copy anything after that 409. I'm going to go back up to my minutes, and I can do a comma, space, and you can see the sample. It tells me exactly what it's going to look like. And then I can just paste what I grabbed. So it's now going to show me seconds. It's a little hard to read there. I can't make this one bigger at all. I apologize. And I'm just going to apply those changes. And you can see as soon as I applied those changes, all of those ones that just said minutes now have seconds associated to them as well. And it applied to all three columns. And there you go. So what we've also done is you can see the idling duration in seconds is a little bit of a lighter gray color than the others. We've also applied some color conditional formatting to it as well. So you can have multiple different types of conditional formatting applied to your cells. So you can see this is what we've done exactly right here. So we're saying if it's less than 1 minute, then I want the color to be a lighter gray. We have also said that I also want it to be showing just seconds. So we've got multiple different criteria in there. So part 3, we're going to be covering over pivot tables, pivot charts, the developer tab, which is a little bit hidden for some folks. We'll show how to actually get that out. And then we're going to talk about leveraging MyGeotab URLs within Excel. So kind of touching base on a little bit of hints of SDK in there. And then I'll even share with you some sites that I tend to go to if I get stuck with anything. Because believe it or not, I get stuck all the time. And there's certain things that I've never even heard of how to do. And Google is my best friend, but there's also some pretty fantastic websites out there that give you lots of information on Excel. So that's about it. Thanks, everybody.
As Ange said, she's going to continue on and do the part 3 of 3. Currently, we will have this one up on MyAdmin within the week. The first one is up there now. It's posted on the website as well, so it's in both places. So thanks so much for watching, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.